And once these things start, though, the worries about miscalculation, even if neither side really wants a major conflict, there's always that danger that it'll escalate into it. That particularly in these days when the Middle East is so volatile and so much is going on there, I think it is worrisome to have this. It's easy to treat it as a kind of a sideshow, but it shouldn't be. I think it is a dangerous game and one that could lead to a much wider war that I think is in almost nobody's interest.
Now, Pakistan has struck back at Iran by attacking what it calls militant groups near the border between the two countries. Earlier this week, in fact on Tuesday, Tehran targeted militant sites within Pakistan. But Islamabad's decision to target the Iran-based Baloch separatists has stoked fears of an escalating conflict between the two countries. So how worried should we be? Let's remember this is the first time another country has openly struck inside Iran since the Iran-Iraq War of the 1980s. Let's talk to Greg Treverton, former chairman of the National Intelligence Council under President Barack Obama. Greg, hello again.
Hello.
How worrying is this?
Well, I think it is worrying because it does represent, as you said, the first time that Iran has been struck from outside for a long time. Obviously, this began with their attacks in Iraq and Syria. Those seem to be mostly score settling when they were targeting groups that had done the mass assassinations at the celebration of the dead Revolutionary Guard leader Soleimani. But this does represent a different phase. It seems those were basically, it seems to me, retribution for what those groups had done to the celebration for Soleimani. This is different. This is looking like they're using this opportunity to strike at militant groups that they worry about, maybe assuming that the world is distracted enough by other things.
But did they really think that Pakistan would not retaliate? I mean, this is a country with whom they've got a pretty decent relations. They share a huge border, something like 500 miles long. What on earth did they think the Pakistanis were going to do?
Yes, it seems like they had to calculate that they would retaliate. And it's what's striking to me is this. There's really no Iranian interest in a wider war, it seems to me. Things are going pretty well if you're sitting in Tehran. You've got your main enemy, Israel, involved in a horrific conflict in Gaza. You've ensured that your second enemy, Saudi Arabia, can't probably finish an Abrahamic Accord with Israel. That's not going to happen soon, or at least not going to happen until something gives for the Palestinians. So this seems to me a time when you'd think that Iran would mostly be sitting by and watching things go pretty well for it. That they've gone beyond the retribution for the Soleimani affair does strike me and is worrisome, I think.
Mm-hmm. What can you tell us about this area, Sistan, Baluchistan, and what Pakistan would call Baluchistan, because that seems to be at the heart of this issue?
Yes, obviously, it's not something I know a lot about, but it does seem to me it's got to be a pretty ungoverned area in which militant groups can have a foothold. And therefore, this is not intended, I suppose, by Iran to be a strike at Pakistan, but really a strike at the militants operating there. We've known for a long time that lots of Pakistan is not governed, is really usable by whatever groups, including terrorist groups. So in that sense, this was not necessarily aimed at Pakistan, but as you said, Pakistan couldn't but retaliate, it seems to me, once their territory had been attacked.
I see that Tehran has summoned Pakistan's chargé d'affaires, and earlier this week, as you would expect, Pakistan recalled its ambassador and wouldn't allow the Iranian envoy from returning. Where do you think things might go from here? I mean, it's important to say as well, there are other countries which are friendly with both Pakistan and Iran, including China, Turkey, and the Taliban in Afghanistan, and they all call for restraint and dialogue, but they'll be watching nervously, won't they?
They will be watching nervously. I think that we hope the next step is basically both sides, or the Iranians feel like they've accomplished what they needed to do in the short run and will lay off, and the Pakistanis will sort of get over it. That's the hope, I think. And once these things start, though, the worries about miscalculation, even if neither side really wants a major conflict, there's always that danger that it'll escalate into it. That particularly in these days when the Middle East is so volatile and so much is going on there, I think it is worrisome to have this. It's easy to treat it as a kind of a sideshow, but it shouldn't be, I think. It is a dangerous game and one that could lead to a much wider war that I think is in almost nobody's interest.
And
That
each
is the
country
concern.
has got its own domestic issues. We know about Iran and the attempt, particularly by women and young people and students, to throw off the yoke of the theocracy. And at the same time, you've got all the trouble going on in Pakistan as we approach the next general election.
Yes, there's plenty going on, to be sure. The Iranians do seem, for better or worse, to have managed to quell the demonstrations about the anti-government protests that were going on. I expected those to have longer legs than they have had, but we may see it again. So in the short run, they've managed to manage that set of issues, not make it go away. That dissatisfaction with the regime is still very powerful, but at least they've handled it for the time being. Pakistan has always been, seems to be on the verge of becoming a failed state, and the fact that it hasn't is in some ways a kind of lesson about human resiliency. Many of us from the outside find it difficult to imagine how Pakistan can continue to exist at all as a more or less functioning nation state.
Indeed. Let's wait and see what happens in the coming days and weeks. Greg Treverton, former chairman of the National Intelligence Council under President Obama, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Times Radio.